this is Emily.
I'm Stephanie.
And today we're going to do a book review video about the book, Strangers in the Woods, The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit by FINKEL. So the story itself surrounds a true story about a man who lived in the woods, in the Maine area of the woods for around 28 years, going undetected by a lot of the summer housers there until he was caught. And then sort of like what happens.
He was not undetected. He was detected. People knew about him.
Well, he was okay, fine. That was a wrong choice of words. You're right.
The people knew about him. They just didn't. We weren't able to catch him.
Yes, he was. So instead of being undetected, he was caught. Yeah, he was not caught for about 28 years. And because of the sort of traces of evidence, or not evidence, but sort of his presence, that sort of the story goes into more about how he would steal food and how he would have to like get resources from some of the summer houses and camps around the area. He became somewhat of a little bit of a legend there until the actual person was found. And so the book really goes into detail about how that happened, as well as the aftermath of it all for the man.
Yeah. So we got this book via Book of the Month, as most of our book reviews are.
Yeah.
And it was her pick. So yeah, I read it. So the funny thing I want to say is, like, I didn't know about, was it based on a true story, right? But I don't remember hearing about this at all.
Yeah.
Like growing up.
Yeah, so for me, I actually had heard about the story via a Vanity Fair article, the same way the author did, about 3 years ago. From there, though, the story itself, like, I knew about it going into reading about this book, but you didn't, so yeah, you can start.
Yeah, so I definitely didn't know anything about this at all. I was just like, oh, it's a true story, okay. So my impression of this was completely different, I think, because one, I didn't realize there was a backstory to it, such as, I mean, I knew there was an article, because Emily mentioned that she heard about this through an article, but I didn't realize that the author got this from the article and then went to find him. I thought the author himself knew about it prior and was going after him for the story, which is why like it took so long for it to be written. And so it was a very different experience for me. I liked it overall just because it was fascinating to read about how he survived for so long. But I think the one thing that kind of like I didn't really particularly like was the fact that he basically used other people's like stuff to survive. He didn't ever once, live off the land. Like, well, he never, for example, the one thing he ever did, I think, was the water that he like collected himself. But everything else, in terms of like the gas, he stole that from people, which I mean, I guess in Maine it's like crucial. So that was like, okay, fine. But like in terms of food, he stole to survive. He never once decided to hunt, even though there was an instance or two where he mentioned about like the wildlife. And I feel bad for like the people who like lived around him and they're just like, like always like haunted by him because they're always worried that he might come in and break into their house and blah blah blah. And he was kind of a stalker because he had to make sure they weren't home when he went to break in, so he would have to kind of know their schedules.
Yeah, but he's not a traditional stalker. He didn't really mean ill intent.
Yeah, no, other than stealing your food and like your resources.
He's a tracker.
Like, yeah,
he hunted in his own way.
Yeah, I guess so.
Like the way he did things, they were controversial, and none of it should be like example of like why everyone should do this. Like he shouldn't have stole. He was rightfully punished for the crimes that he committed, but at the same time, it's also bringing up this idea that like, you're kind of put into this situation, like you're brought into society this way, and you're asked, regardless of your permission, to participate.
And I understand that. If he wants to leave society, he has all right to leave it. He can't leave it and then still steal from society.
Right, but the thing is that we're actually not taught as people how to actually leave society, because society does not want us to leave it. at the same time. So like I feel like that's the sort of the angle a little bit of how the book is going about it, because if you really wanted to leave, could you leave? Do you know how to hunt? Do you know how to survive for yourself? Do you even know how to put up a tent?
Well, I have no interest in being a hermit, so I would never think about that kind of stuff.
Right, but because that sort of thing is that you like the way that this world works for you, but for people who don't, it can become an issue because they're like, I don't really understand why I am here.
That's why there are these like self-sustaining farms and stuff like that. Like those are people that want to be more isolated, and so they build up a community of people who think the same way, and they have these like self-sustaining farms,
but then again you're talking again about community. He wanted to be alone, so I'm saying that back in the day there were like ways for people to want to live a hermit life. So like they brought examples.
And then back in the day when they did that, they hunted for themselves and
not necessarily, no, because there were examples of anchorites who lived at the side of the churches, and the one thing that they gave back to people was advice. He did break all these rules, and I'm not at all excusing his behavior, but it's this principle he brings out of like he's actually able to read. Like during the time when he wasn't working and wasn't trying to steal, he was reading profoundly. He was able to come up with all these insights about himself. He's highly articulate, as an intelligent being. So what exactly is work, and what makes it like beneficial for us, because it clearly brings up the question, like, is the work that we're doing right now actually valuable in a lot of ways? Because it's all kind of like mindless, menial, like some of the things, like it's not something we haven't experienced as people. There are times when you really do feel like maybe it'd be better if I was able to think through things more and be given that sort of peace and solitude. But that's not how like our hectic lives, especially with like now social media and cell phones, not saying that they're bad or anything, but that's not really giving us that allowance. And that's also like a particular, like that's like the, I guess, the good side of the story, where like you're trying to bring up these questions like, is that really right? Is it for like we'll never, I personally will never go to his extreme of like completely cutting everyone else off. You also will not, obviously, but I
like my Facebook too much.
Yeah, but in general, like it's just this idea is like we should be able to have that sort of cushion to think more for ourselves, and you won't be able to be given that unless society sometimes cuts you a little bit of slack, because there are people out there who like honestly are working like minimum wage jobs, and they're never able to really think for themselves, and that's why they always stay at the bottom. And so this guy, he found one particular loophole, right? It wasn't a great one because it did hurt people, but it was a loophole nevertheless. So it was like kind of like the ends and the means.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like there's just his decisions I just can't like agree with. A lot of his decisions I can't agree with. But I just thought it was interesting how like I'm not terribly surprised that he chose this method, because he grew up in a very like self-sustaining family as well. Okay. Like the whole greenhouse or whatever that his family built from the bottom up, that used like solar panels or like the natural elements of the environment around them to build that without using anything electricity or anything like that is generated from that they would have to pay for, which I was like, okay, so he kind of already had that kind of like foundation growing up. So I think that's another reason why I'm kind of like, well, if he had that foundation, like learning how to do all these things by hand, and was mostly like relatively like alone, because his family was always known as very isolated from the rest of the community around them. And so him going to a hermit was kind of like just a next step. Like his family was already very like hermit-like anyways.
I'd say that it was a really interesting read in general, because I found out a lot of the details I didn't know before about how he survived and how hurt actually people were by it. That was not as present in the article when I was reading it. And I like the fact that he actually understood he wasn't doing the right thing. I mean, he persisted with it because it's just about survival to him at this point, regardless if you don't agree or disagree. But I mean, it wasn't like there were seeds laying around in the summer houses either. So, I mean, he didn't have the foresight to suddenly like buy seeds, I guess, when he first ran out there. But I did have certain levels of empathy for him, because it could be very difficult for a man like him to really like exist in our current society, just because of how interwoven we all are, and how very little room we're really given to I don't know, think without the masses.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly an entertaining read. Well, not maybe not entertaining, but like an intriguing read is what I would say, just because it's very different from what I normally read. And also it was about a hermit. You know, you don't really read like a true hermit story, like a real life story, in a while. So
yeah, but that's our review for today. You liked it, right? Overall?
Yeah, I mean, overall it was definitely interesting. Like,
okay.
I don't know. There's at the same time, it's like it's one of those weird things where like you like the book in general, but you don't like the character.
That's totally fine.
So it's just like, yeah, I liked it, but like not really. Like, yeah, like that.
Okay. All right.
So I'm like a half, I guess.
Half?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have no problems with devils in saints' clothing, so I think this story definitely had a point to it, had a purpose, and that's enough for me, because most of the times I feel like, what's the point of reading this book? There was no point. Yeah. So I liked it a lot.
Yeah. So I think that's it for today. We're going to include the links below for Book of the Month if you want to join us in our subscription, as well as if you want to purchase the book, hard copy or audiobook. Do they have audiobook? I don't know. But I'll post them all below. And yeah, I think that's it. Don't forget to subscribe and like our video.
All right, thank you guys for your time. Bye.